Hey guys, Yankee here, and today I'm going to be giving my thoughts on Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki OVA 3 Episode 1. I'm going to be honest, I have been dreading watching this episode for a little while now, and we'll talk about why here in a second, but it wasn't as bad as I remember it. And the thing that I was sort of didn't want to sit through was the recaps and the flashbacks and the constant switch between new 2003, I think that's when OVA 3 came out, like early 2000s digital animation constantly being put side by side with the old OVA 1 and 2 cell animation. I remember the first time watching this, like being completely taken out every time they switch back and forth because it looks so different. The art style of this OVA is different than the originals. And again, just animation looks different in the digital era than it did in the past. And so constantly seeing them flip back and forth between them, it doesn't look good. It makes the new show look bad, which another thing that I wasn't looking forward to in this is I distinctly remember OVA 3 looking terrible. And coming into this, it's like, it doesn't actually look that bad. It's just comparing it to OVA 1 and 2 made it look really bad. So yeah, the recaps are terrible. Like, they didn't need to be here. Make, like, if you wanted the recap, just put like a little 2-3 minute recap bonus feature on the DVD, right? We didn't need it integrated into the episode. It looked terrible. So that's out of the way. And that's one of my biggest complaints of this episode is that. And again, it wasn't even as bad as I remember it. There was one chunk in the middle that felt pretty long when they basically recapped all of OVA 1. But for the most part, it was just a snippet here and there, so it's not as bad. Alright, that's out of the way. Moving on to the actual episode. We open up with a space battle in the area we had seen in... I think we saw it at the end of OVA 1, but we especially saw it in OVA 2 when Clay was going to see Tokimi. So sort of like that weird space area where everything looks odd, right? It's got a cool look to it, but there's just like a fleet of ships coming in, and they are battling against Z. And it's been a while since I saw OVA 2, but I think at the end of OVA 2 we saw like a silhouette or just like a glimpse of Z. Maybe we got his name. I don't remember, but I'm just going to call him Z this whole video. So he's there messing up ships coming to this area. And that's about all the action we're getting in this episode outside of flashbacks. Z, after defeating all the enemies, goes to Tokimi. They have like a conversation between him, Tokimi, and the guy that's in charge of this universe. I don't know what his name is, if he has a name even. But Tokimi sees Washu, Tsunami, and calls them, Washu One-sama and Tsunami One-sama. So, what could their relationship be? They've been kind of hinting at this for a while now, but they really just come out and clearly state what's going on here in the first episode, which I did not remember. This is all taking place during the Clay fight. This is where the first bits of reused footage comes in, where they're just showing the battle against Clay, and then we see like Tenchi pulling everybody out of that black hole. Looking at my notes. This is the only other note I have for this section is I don't remember what his name is. Like, I don't even know if he has a name, but like the deity being in charge of this dimension basically says, this dimension suits your needs. That's why Washu and Tsunami are here. Because something about this universe has what you're after, and I don't think we have any knowledge of what that is at this point. But that's a line that stood out to me on the rewatch. And then we go to the Tenchi house, and not a whole lot going on here. Just daily stuff. Sasami is cooking. Washu's just sort of hanging out. We get an interaction between Ryoko and Mihoshi, where Ryoko goes to wake Mihoshi up, and she sends a letter to family. And this is where we get Z sort of messing with things. Back in the Tokimi section, there was a moment where she looks at Z and's like, look, don't interfere, like, stay out of this. And Z basically says to himself, like, look, you can tell me not to fiddle with things, but I want to do what I want. You can't stop me anyway. So he comes to the Tenchi house and just messes with Mihoshi's letter, and that's it. That's all we get of him for the rest of the episode. Tenchi is not here. He is going to town to see his father, and this is where a bit of confusion on my part come in. I always assumed that Tenchi had lived in Tokyo at the start of the show, and then his house got dropped off by the shrine where his grandfather was. Apparently they don't live in Tokyo, which, now that I think about it, makes a lot more sense when we have a show called Tenchi in Tokyo, where he goes to Tokyo. So I don't know what town they're in, but I assume they're closer to his grandfather's, the shrine that his grandfather's at, than I initially had thought. But Tenchi is just in town, going to see his dad, and in this we see little things that are, like, cause the flashbacks. Like, oh look, here's the school that I destroyed being rebuilt. And then we get, like, a recap of the fight there. And then we get to see some of Tenchi's old classmates, which, this section was fun, but kind of long. You kind of forget that Tenchi was actually in school at one point, because once his house gets teleported out into the woods, we never go back there again, and we never touch on that again. So to see it brought up and be like, oh, hey, here are these old friends, and some time has passed. I don't remember how much time is supposed to have passed between OVA 1 and OVA 2, but it's like a year or two. It's like, oh, they reunite, and they're just talking, and it's kind of, like, I don't want to be rude here, but it's kind of just padding. Like, nothing relevant really happens here. It's just a way to be like, oh yeah, Tenchi is still a teenager. Here are his classmates who are still in school. And then we move on. Yeah, that section was fine. Kind of dragged out for a bit, but it wasn't too bad. Then we get to the lot where Tenchi's house used to be, and this is where the big chunk of flashback where they just recap all of OVA 1 happens. And then he goes to see his dad, who's living in an apartment, and we meet a woman named Rhea. Oh yes, also I should mention before I move on to Rhea, we keep getting recollections of Tenchi and his mother. So when he was at the empty lot, there was a scene that he remembered, which was actually new, where his father had, like, taken a stick and, like, roughly drawn out, like, the shape of their house and where everything's going to be. And so Tenchi had a memory of that. Then we go to the apartment where his father is staying. We meet Rhea, and who is this character? Well, she's very important. We've just conveniently never heard of her before. And this is my second complaint with this show. I don't mind Rhea, especially later on as we keep going. I hate when they introduce a character and be like, hey, this person has been important the whole time. Well, why didn't we hear about him until now? Well, she just couldn't show up. Sometimes it works fine, especially if the character doesn't really talk about that stuff and we haven't seen other, like, important people. But, like, we had a whole episode in OVA 2 about, like, this random kid that he's related to that they had to babysit. Here's this character that is supposed to be very important to him, and people at the house know who she is. So Sasami at some point mentions, like, Rhea's name later on in a familiar way. So people at the house know who she is. We have just never seen her until now. And it just really feels kind of shoehorned in. And it is. But we sort of talk to her, get to know her for a minute. We learn that she has been helping sort of cover up some of the incidents that have been happening, like the school blowing up and their house disappearing and the bridge getting messed up. And she works with Nobuyuki. And we see in flashbacks that she has been close to the family for a while. We see her in a school uniform. And we also start setting the stage for things that are going to be brought up later at the season. But there's a moment where we see Rhea, like, cooking, and there's a talk of between Tenchi and his father later on where it's like, Rhea had given him some food, and he's like, Rhea's food, like, I don't even remember what my mom's cooking tastes like. And then Nobuyuki's telling him, like, yeah, Rhea learned how to cook from your mom, so it's kind of the same. And so we're setting up that Rhea was a sort of maternal figure for Tenchi, which is going to be brought up later on in the season, but they're setting it up here in the first episode, which makes sense. Alright, so, whole scene with Rhea. This whole trip confused me for a bit, because Tenchi went to town to see his dad. And then his dad drives him back home. They don't, like, hang around at the apartment for much, so I don't really know why Nobuyuki had him come, right? Tenchi arrives, Nobuyuki has a few minutes more of work left, and then they take off, and then Nobuyuki just drives him back home, and then while they're there, Nobuyuki goes to see his wife's grave. And we get a lot of mention of, like, when Tenchi and Nobuyuki are in the car, Nobuyuki wants to say something, he doesn't do it yet. Tenchi asks about his mother. He doesn't know really why she died. He just doesn't know if she was sick or in an accident or what exactly happened with her. And Nobuyuki just sort of skirts past and says, we'll tell you eventually. And then up at the grave, Nobuyuki and Yosho are talking, and they're like, yes, it's about time we tell Tenchi. So something's going on with Tenchi's mother, and we don't know what it is. Then after that, the back half of this episode is kind of all over the place, too. Like, we're kind of jumping from here to here. So we're, like, in the car with Tenchi and Nobuyuki, and then, now Tenchi's in the field and Nobuyuki's at the grave. And now Ryo-Ohki's lost for some reason, and we're trying to find her, which ends up Ryoko, who is linked to Ryo-Ohki, uses her ability to find her, brings her back, and we see some of the effects of her being merged with Zero, where she's more compassionate with Ryo-Ohki and, like, touching her and, like, bathing with her and wanting to sleep with her and just being more, like, familial with Ryo-Ohki than she was in the past. Which is, we didn't really get to touch on that in OVA 2, because OVA 2 ended after Zero and Ryoko were merged, so that's fine, but it just, towards the end of this episode, it felt like we were just hopping all over the place. What do I have? Oh, I'm only on the last two notes. So, our last little segment here of this episode, Nobuyuki is in Tenchi's room building him a PC, and everybody's watching. Washu is amused watching, like, old technology be built. I don't know why everybody else is there. Mihoshi's, like, napping with Ryo-Ohki, and Ryoko and Ayaka are just sort of, like, watching Washu more than they're watching Nobuyuki build the PC, and I don't really know why everybody's all huddled up in there. I guess it's just a change of pace, and people are just, like, interested to see what it is, I guess. But it's just, I don't know, it's odd having everybody cramped up in that room while Nobuyuki just builds a PC. And then there's a ring at the doorbell, and Ryoko goes to check to see who it is, doesn't want to open the door because she's afraid it might be Masaki and she might get swung around. Eventually Sasami comes down, opens the door, and who is it at the door? It's Tenchi's mother. And that's the cliffhanger for episode 1 of OVA 3. This cliffhanger, I think, is pretty good. I remember my first time watching it really being struck by it and being like, wait, what is going on? Like, they've been kind of, like, dancing around Tenchi's mom the whole episode. Is she actually alive? Has she actually been alive this whole time? And I guess we'll see next episode, but the cliffhanger's pretty good. Overall, the episode is fine. I think it gets a bit messy towards the end, and then the first half is kind of a mess because it's recap a lot, seeing old footage. Second half is like, we're just quickly getting through a bunch of stuff. So it's an okay episode. Some interesting things happen. They're definitely doing a good job of setting up things for the rest of the season. Like, okay, here's Z, and he's messing with things. Okay, here's Tokimi. She is interested in Tenchi and Washu and Sasami/Tsunami. And then the cliffhanger. Overall, fine episode. Messy, but fine. Definitely has... It's one of those things where it's been so long that it's kind of hard to judge the mistakes that were made in this first episode, but like it was like what, 8 years between the end of OVA 2 and the start of OVA 3, or like 5 years or something. So like I get why they want recap, but I just don't think it was done well. And yeah, just trying to rush through some things here and there too just made it feel a bit lost. But yeah, OVA 3 off to an okay start. I'm excited to see the next episode because from what I remember, it was one of the ones that I liked the most of OVA 3. But yeah, I guess we'll see next time. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.